Hi everyone, how are you doing today? I thought I would share with you some brief thoughts on The Little Mermaid, which I just read on the channel. There will be spoilers, so if you haven't read it yet, you might want to listen to it first or read it on your own. But I have read this now, I want to say 3 times during my life, and my impressions of it have definitely changed over the years, so I wanted to share that. It was either in one of our vintage fairy tale collections, or my great aunt also had a collection of fairy tales. So at some point I read it, and I remember thinking it was really sad. Like, all of Andersen's stories are so sad, and I thought it was a little like weird too, right? And I read it again, I think in college, and I still thought it was weird and disturbing, and I really didn't like the ending at all. So that was kind of my early experience with the story. So then I decided to read it again in anticipation of the remake film coming out. And I find myself having a different reaction to it now, and also having watched the remake and being able to compare the stories a lot more closely. I think that Andersen's tale has some really interesting themes that the Disney ones do not, and things that I can relate to in a way that I don't really feel myself relating to in the Disney film. So the story starts out very similarly. You've got the Little Mermaid. She doesn't have a name in this version. Living under the sea. She's, under the sea royalty. She's the daughter of the king. And, just kind of like the film, there's this taboo of going to the surface of the water. Now, in the Disney film, she kind of rebels and goes to the surface, at least in the remake. I haven't watched the animated one in a while. In the book, she actually waits her turn, till she turns 15. And so she goes to the surface of the water, and just like the movie, she sees this ship, and they're having a birthday celebration for this young prince, who's Prince Eric in the film. She falls in love with him. She ends up saving his life when there's a shipwreck, and unfortunately he doesn't know it's her that saved his life. So a lot of parody between the two stories at the beginning. One thing that's kind of interesting is that Ariel in the book, I'm calling her Ariel, but the Little Mermaid, she's not rebellious at all. She's actually quite a bit in line with the society she lives in, and she's not, there's no arguments with her father. In fact, he doesn't really make much of an appearance in the story at all. She does talk to her grandmother, who warns her about, it's not that it's not that she can't become a human, but it's just going to be a very long shot, as the grandmother tries to convey to her. And then where the story kind of diverges is when she goes to see the sea witch, Ursula, again, not named in the book. And in the book, the sea witch doesn't really have any agenda of her own. She gives the Little Mermaid the potion without really any particular scheme in mind. But big difference is she actually cuts out the mermaid's tongue. She doesn't just take her voice in this like metaphysical way like she does in the Disney film. She cuts her tongue out, and then she gives her the potion, and then the Little Mermaid goes to the surface, meets the prince. Unfortunately, the prince never does recognize her, and he ends up reconnecting with the girl who found him on the beach originally, thinks that she saved his life. This girl is very beautiful and good, and she's not, connected to the sea witch in any way. They end up getting married, and the Little Mermaid, per, the witch's deal, she's gonna die as soon as the prince gets married to somebody else. But because of her good deeds, she gets a chance at continuing good works for another 300 years. And with the possibility of getting an immortal soul. So that's kind of the recap of the story. And one thing I found kind of troubling about it, and you see some of this in in the Disney film as well. But like she's given up so very much for this person she doesn't really know. She's completely obsessed with him, and you know, to me now with a bit more life experience under my belt, I just think, oh boy, this girl, she needs therapy. She's got major limerence for this prince. And to the extent that she's so obsessed about him that she's willing to give up her entire life for him. And that doesn't really make a lot of sense other than the context of, again, obsessive romantic love, limerence, and just this really a tragic attachment she has to him. I hate to say it, but I see a lot of my younger self in her, and so that's what kind of hit me this time around. It's like, oh, you know, here's a book that I had read several times throughout my young life, and I didn't heed the lesson, I didn't understand it. Now I finally understand it. So that really resonates with me in a way that the Disney film does not, because in the Disney story, it's really more centered around her being a rebellious teenager. It's more centered around, you know, this idea that she's fated to be with the prince, and Ursula's just getting in the way. Ursula's just scheming to upset things, but that ultimately, as in every Disney story, you know, true love conquers all, and, you know, there's going to be a happy ending. It's just a matter of time. In this story, there's no such guarantee and there's no such promise. And you get that sense throughout the story, just even from the beginning, like, you know, it just seems ill-fated from the start. Along with that, though, she has a slightly different motive in the book. You know, this idea of being able to live as a human and enjoy things humans do and have an immortal soul and ascend to a higher realm is something you don't get in the Disney film. And I did appreciate that this time around, because even though she's definitely obsessed with this guy, she has another goal as well, which is to ascend to those higher realms. So antagonist-wise, the Sea Witch in the book is not really, like, she's pretty underwhelming compared to Ursula. And King Triton, that is her father, the Little Mermaid's father, again, barely makes an appearance in the book. He's no kind of antagonist or anti-hero. The Little Mermaid's main struggle in the book is just the way things are. It's her reality. And I appreciated that. I liked that. She's already independent. She already seems to have it all. It's more a story about how the circumstances you're born into and the society and reality you live in have this overwhelming impact on your life and your future that you may or may not have much control over. And so she reaches a point where she decides to make these incredibly big sacrifices to achieve not just romance, but a whole different life and a whole different reality. I would say, you know, the ending's still pretty preachy. The ending is also kind of unsatisfying because she doesn't get the guy. But I did like what Andersen was doing here. As always, he just, you know, nobody writes pathos like he does. And I did cry a couple times reading it. So, you know, there's that. I think what I'm trying to say is this book has aged really well. And it has its own merits, you know, apart from the Disney films. So those are my thoughts on The Little Mermaid. Let me know what you thought, and I will see you next time, hopefully with some thoughts on the remake itself.